This science is yet in its infancy, but it has already produced one of the most beneficial effects. The accuracy of the tables of life have rendered the calculations of rates of insurance a matter of much greater certainty than they were heretofore. The system of keeping the public accounts has been simplified and improved, and finally, the experimental sciences of medicine and political economy have been fixed on a firmer foundation than could be anticipated in the last century. Even in private life, this science is likely to prove of immense advantage by directing attention to the collection and registration of facts, and thus preventing the formation of hasty judgments and erroneous conclusions. The compiler, or rather the superintendent of the 7th United States Census, Professor DeBow, a gentleman of more than ordinary industry and practical learning, who, in his excellent review, has from time to time displayed much commendable zeal in his efforts to develop the industrial resources of the southern and southwestern states, and who is perhaps the greatest statistician in the country, says, "Statistics are far from being the barren array of figures ingeniously and laboriously combined into columns and tables, which many persons are apt to suppose them. They constitute rather the ledger of a nation, in which, like the merchant in his books, the citizen can read at one view all the results of a year or of a period of years as compared with the other periods, and deduce the profit or the loss which has been made in morals, education, wealth, or power. Impressed with a sense of the propriety of introducing in this well as the succeeding chapters of our work a number of tabular statements exhibiting the comparative growth and prosperity of the free and slave states, we have deemed it eminently proper to adduce the testimony of these distinguished authors in support of the claims which official facts and accurate statistics lay to our consideration. And here we may remark that the statistics which we propose to offer, like those already given, have been obtained from official sources and may therefore be relied on as correct. The object we have in view is making a free use of facts and figures, if not already apparent, will soon be understood. It is not so much in its moral and religious aspects that we propose to discuss the question of slavery, as in its social and political character and influences. To say nothing of the sin and the shame of slavery, we believe it is a most expensive and unprofitable institution, and if our brethren of the South will but throw aside their unfounded prejudices and preconceived opinions and give us a fair and patient hearing, we feel confident that we can bring them to the same conclusion. Indeed, we believe that we shall be enabled, not alone by our own contributions, but with the aid of incontestable facts and arguments which we shall introduce from other sources, to convince all true-hearted, candid, and intelligent Southerners who may chance to read our book, and we hope their name may be legion, that slavery and nothing but slavery has retarded the progress and prosperity of our portion of the Union, depopulated and impoverished our cities by forcing the more industrious and enterprising natives of the soil to emigrate to the free states, brought our domain under a sparse and inert population by preventing foreign immigration, made us a tributary to the North, and reduced us to the humiliating condition of mere provincial subjects in fact, though not in name. We believe, moreover, that every patriotic Southerner thus convinced will feel it a duty he owes himself to the country and to his God to become a thorough, inflexible, practical abolitionist. So mote it be. Now to our figures. Few persons have an adequate idea of the important part cardinal numbers are now playing in the cause of liberty. They are working wonders in the South. Intelligent businessmen from the Chesapeake to the Rio Grande are beginning to see that slavery, even in a mercenary point of view, is impolitic because it is unprofitable. Those unique, mysterious little Arabic sentinels on the watchtowers of political economy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0, have joined forces, allied themselves to the power of freedom, and are now hemming in and combating the institution with the most signal success. If let alone, we have no doubt the digits themselves would soon terminate the existence of slavery, but we do not mean to let them alone. They must not have all the honor of annihilating the monstrous iniquity. We want to become an auxiliary in the good work and facilitate it. The liberation of 5 million of poor white trash, from the second degree of slavery, and of 3 million of miserable kidnapped Negroes from the first degree cannot be accomplished too soon. That it was not accomplished many years ago is our misfortune. It now behooves us to take a bold and determined stand in the defense of the inalienable rights of ourselves and our fellow men, and to avenge the multiplicity of wrongs, social and political, which we have suffered at the hands of a villainous oligarchy. It is madness to delay. We cannot be too hasty in carrying out our designs. Precipitance in this matter is an utter impossibility. If today we could emancipate all the slaves in the Union, we would do it, and the country and everybody in it would be vastly better off tomorrow. Now is the time for action. Let us work. By taking a sort of an inventory of the agricultural products of the free and slave states in 1850, we now propose to correct the most extraordinary and mischievous error into which the people of the South have unconsciously fallen. Agriculture, it is well known, is the sole boast of the South, and it is strange to say many pro-slavery Southerners, who in our latitude pass for intelligent men, are so puffed up with the idea of our importance in this respect that they speak of the North as a sterile region, unfit for cultivation, and quite dependent on the South for the necessaries of life. Such rampant ignorance ought to be knocked in the head. We can prove that the North produces greater quantities of breadstuffs than the South. Figures shall show the facts. Properly, the South has nothing left to boast of. The North has surpassed her in everything and is going farther and farther ahead of her every day. We ask the readers careful attention to the following tables, which we have prepared at no little cost of time and trouble, and which, when duly considered in connection with the foregoing and subsequent portions of our work, will, we believe, carry convictions to the mind that the downward tendency of the South can be arrested only by the abolition of slavery. Now, the book is available on archive, but I don't need to tell you that pages 35 to 39 are nothing but statistics, so I'm not going to read them. If you want to read them, you can go ahead and do that. But I'm picking up after the agricultural statistics, and he says, so much for the boasted agricultural superiority of the South. Mark well the balance in bushels and the difference in value. Is either in favor of the South? No. Are both in favor of the North? Yes. Here we have unquestionable proof that of all the bushel measure productions of the nations, the free states produce far more than one half, and it is worthy of particular mention that the excesses of northern products is of the most valuable kind. The account shows a balance against the South in favor of the North of 17,423,152 bushels, and a difference in value of 44,782,636 dollars. Please bear these facts in mind, for in order to show positively how the free and slave states do stand upon the great and important subject of rural economy, we intend to take an account of all the other products of the soil, of the livestock upon the farms, of the animals slaughtered, and in fact every item of husbandry of the two sections. And if in bringing our tabular exercises to a close, we find slavery gaining upon freedom, a thing it has never been known to do, we shall, as a matter of course, see that the above amount is transferred to the credit of the side of which it right belongs. In making up these tables, we have two objects in view. The first is to open the eyes of the non-slaveholders of the South to the system of deception that has so long been practiced upon them, and the second is to show the slaveholders themselves, we have references only to those who are not too perverse or ignorant to perceive naked truths, that free labor is far more respectable, profitable, and productive than slave labor. In the South, unfortunately, no kind of labor is either free or respectable. Every white man who is under the necessity of earning his bread by the sweat of his brow or by manual labor in any capacity, no matter how unassuming in deportment or exemplary in morals, is treated as if he were a loathsome beast and shunned with the utmost disdain. His soul may be the very seat of honor and integrity, yet without slaves, himself a slave, he is accounted as a nobody and would be deemed intolerably presumptuous if he dared to open his mouth even so wide as to give a faint utterance to a three-lettered monosyllable like yea or nay in the presence of an august knight of the whip and the lash. There are few Southerners who will not be astonished at the disclosures of these statistical comparisons between the free and the slave states. That the astonishment of the more intelligent and patriotic non-slaveholders will be mingled with indignation is no more than we anticipate. We confess our own surprise and deep chagrin at the result of our investigations. Until we examined into the matter, we thought and hoped that the South was really ahead of the North in one particular, that of agriculture, but our thoughts have been changed and our hopes frustrated, for instead of finding ourselves the possessors of a single advantage, we behold our dear native South stripped of every loyal and sinking deeper and deeper into the depths of poverty and shame, while at the same time we see the North, our successful rival, extracting and absorbing the few elements of wealth yet remaining amongst us, and rising higher and higher in the scale of fame, fortune, and invulnerable power. Thus, our disappointment gives way to a feeling of intense mortification, and our soul involuntarily, but justly, we believe, cries out for retribution against the treacherous, slave-driving legislatures who have so basely and unpatriotically neglected the interests of their poor white constituents and bargained away the rights of their posterity. Notwithstanding the fact that the white non-slaveholders of the South are in the majority, as 5-1, they have never yet had any part nor lot in the framing of the laws under which they live. There is no legislation except the benefit of slavery and slaveholders. As a general rule, poor white persons are regarded with less esteem and attention than the Negroes, and though the condition of the latter is wretched beyond description, vast numbers of the former are infinitely worse off. A cunningly devised mockery of freedom is guaranteed to them, and that is all. To all intents and purposes, they are disenfranchised and outlawed, and the only privilege extended to them is a shallow and circumscribed participation in the political movements that usher slaveholders into office. We have not breathed away 27 years in the South without becoming acquainted with the demagogical maneuverings of the oligarchy. Their intrigues and tricks of legerdemain are as familiar to us as household words. In vain might the world be ransacked for a more precious junto of flatterers and cajolers. It is amusing to ignorance, amazing to credulity, and insulting to intelligence to hear them in their blathering efforts to mystify and pervert the sacred principles of liberty and turn the curse of slavery into a blessing. To the illiterate poor whites, made poor and ignorant by the system of slavery, they hold out the idea that slavery is the very bulwark of our liberties and the foundation of American independence. For hours at a time, day after day, will they expatiate upon the inexpressible beauties and excellencies of the great free and independent nation, and finally, with the most extravagant gesticulation and rhetorical flourishes, conclude their nonsensical ravings by attributing all the glory and prosperity of the country from Maine to Texas and from Georgia to California to the invaluable institutions of the South. With what patience we could command, we have frequently listened to the incoherent and truth-murdering declamations of these champions of slavery, and, in the absence of a more politic method of giving vent to our disgust and indignation, have voluntarily bit our lips into blisters. The lords of the lash are not only absolute masters of the blacks who are bought and sold and driven about like so many cattle, but they are also the oracles and arbiters of all non-slaveholding whites whose freedom is merely nominal and whose unparalleled illiteracy and degradation is purposely and fiendishly perpetuated. How little the poor white trash, the great majority of Southern people, know of the real conditions of the country is indeed sadly astonishing. The truth is, they know nothing of public measures and little of private affairs except what their imperious masters, the slave drivers, condescend to tell, and that is but precious little, and even that little, always garbled and one-sided, is never told except in public harangues. For the haughty cavaliers of shackles and handcuffs will not degrade themselves by holding private converse with those who have neither dimes nor hereditary rights in human flesh. Wherever it pleases and to the extent it pleases a slaveholder to become communicative, poor whites may hear with fear and trembling but not speak. They must be as mum as dumb brutes and stand in awe of their august superiors, or be crushed with stern rebukes, cruel oppressions, or downright violence. If they dare to think for themselves, their thoughts must be forever concealed. The expression of any sentiment at all conflicting with the gospel of slavery dooms them at once in the community in which they live, and then, whether willing or unwilling, they are obliged to become heroes, martyrs, or exiles. They may thirst for knowledge, but there is no Moses among them to smite it out of the rocks of Horeb. The black veil through whose almost impenetrable meshes light seldom gleams has long been pendant over their eyes, and there, with fiendish jealousy, the slave-driving ruffians solicitously guard it. Non-slaveholders are not only kept in ignorance of what is transpiring at the North, but they are continually misinformed of what is going on even in the South. Never were the poorer classes of a people, and those classes so largely in the majority and all inhabiting the same country, so basely duped, so adroitly swindled, or so damnably outraged. It is expected that the stupid and sequacious masses, the white victims of slavery, will believe, and as a general thing, they do believe whatever the slaveholders tell them, and thus it is that they are cajoled into the notion that they are the freest, happiest, and most intelligent people in the world, and are taught to look with prejudice and disapprobation upon every new principle or progressive movement. Thus it is that the South, woefully inert and inventionless, has lagged behind the North and is now weltering in the cesspool of ignorance and degradation. We have already intimated that the opinion is prevalent throughout the South that the free states are quite sterile and unproductive, and that they are mainly dependent on us for breadstuffs and other provisions. So far as the cereals, fruits, garden vegetables, and exculent roots are concerned, we have in the preceding tables shown the utter falsity of this opinion, and we now purpose to show that it is equally erroneous in other particulars, and very far from the truth in the general reckoning. We can prove, and we intend to prove, from the facts in our possessions, that the hay crop of the free states is worth considerably more in dollars and cents than all of the cotton, tobacco, rice, hay, and hemp produced in the 15 slave states. This statement may strike some of our readers with amazement, and others may, for the moment, regard it as quite incredible, but it is true, nevertheless, and we shall soon proceed to confirm it. The single free state of New York produces more than 3 times the quantity of hay than is produced in all of the slave states. Ohio produces a larger number of tons than all the southern and southwestern states, and so does Pennsylvania. Vermont, little and unpretending as she is, does the same thing, with the exception of Virginia. Look at the facts as presented in the tables, and let your own eyes, physical and intellectual, confirm you in the truth. And yet, forsooth, the slave-driving oligarchy would whip us into the belief that agriculture is not one of the leading and lucrative pursuits of the free states, that the soil there is an uninterrupted barren waste, and that our northern brethren, having the advantage in nothing except wealth, population, inland and foreign commerce, manufactures, mechanism, inventions, literature, the arts and sciences, and their concomitant branches of profitable industry, miserable objects of charity, are dependent upon us for the necessaries of life. Next to Virginia, Maryland is the greatest southern hay-producing state, and yet it is the opinion of several of the most extensive hay and grain dealers in Baltimore with whom we have conversed on the subject that the domestic crop is scarcely equal to 1/3 the demand, and that the balance required for home consumption, almost 2/3, is chiefly brought from New York, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts. At this rate, Maryland receives and consumes not less than 315,000 tons of northern hay every year, and this, as we are informed by the dealers above mentioned, at an average cost to the last purchaser by the time it's stowed in the haymow of at least $25 per ton. It would thus appear that this most popular and valuable proveniator, one of the most staple commodities of the North, commands a market in a single slave state to the amount of $7,875,000 per annum. In this same state of Maryland, less than $1 million worth of cotton finds a market. The whole number of bales sold here in 1850 amounted to only 23,325, valued at $746,400. Briefly, then, and in round numbers, we may state the case thus. Maryland buys annually $7 million worth of hay from the north and $1 million worth of cotton from the south. Let slaveholders and their fawning defenders read, ponder, and compare. The exact quantities of northern hay, rye, and buckwheat flour, Irish potatoes, fruits, clover, and grass seeds, and other products of the soil received and consumed in all the slaveholding states, we have no means of ascertaining. But for all practical purposes, we can arrive sufficiently from what we see with our own eyes and hear with our ears wherever we go. Food from the north for one man, or for the beast, or for both, is for sale in every market in the South. Even in the most insignificant little villages in the interior of the slave states, where books, newspapers, and other mediums of intelligence are unknown, where the poor whites and the Negroes are alike bowed down in heathenish ignorance and barbarism, and where the news is received but once a week, and then only in a northern-built stagecoach drawn by horses in a northern harness to the charge of a driver dressed cap a pee in northern habiliments, and with a northern whip in his hand, the agricultural products of the north, either crude, prepared, pickled, or preserved, are ever to be found. Mortifying as the acknowledgement of the fact is to us, it is our unbiased opinion, an opinion which will, we believe, be endorsed by every intelligent person who goes into a careful examination and comparison of all the facts in the case, that the profits arising to the north from the sale of provender and provisions to the south are far greater than those arising to the south from the sale of cotton, tobacco, and breadstuffs to the north. It follows, then, that the agricultural interests of the north, being not only equal but actually superior to those of the south, the hundreds of millions of dollars which the commerce and manufacturers of the former annually yield is just so much clear and independent gain over the latter. It follows also from a corresponding train or system of deduction, and with all the foregoing facts in view, that the differences between freedom and slavery is simply the differences between sense and nonsense, wisdom and folly, good and evil, right and wrong. Any observant American, from whatever point of the compass he may hail, who will take the trouble to pass through the southern markets, both great and small, as we have done, and inquire where this article, this and that, and the other came from, will be utterly astonished at the variety and quantity of northern agricultural productions kept for sale. And this state of things is growing worse and worse every year. Exclusively agricultural as the South is in her industrial pursuits, she is barely able to support her sparse and degenerate population. Her men and her domestic animals, both dwarfed into shabby objects of commiseration under the blighting effects of slavery, are now constantly feeding on the multifarious products of northern soil. And if the whole truth must be told, we may here add that these products, like other articles of merchandise purchased at the north, are genuinely bought on credit, and in a great number of instances, by far too many, never paid for, not as a general rule because the purchasers are dishonest or unwilling to pay, but because they are impoverished and depressed by the retrogressive and deadening operations of slavery, that most unprofitable and pernicious institution under which they live. To show how well we are sustained in our remarks upon hay and other special products of the soil, as well to give circulation to other facts of equal significance, we quote a single passage from an address by Paul C. Cameron before the Agricultural Society of Orange County, North Carolina. This production is, in the main, so powerfully conceived, so correct and plausible in its statements and conclusions, and so well calculated, though perhaps not intended to arouse the old North State to a sense of her natural greatness and acquired shame, that we could wish to see it published in pamphlet form and circulated throughout the length and breadth of that unfortunate and degraded heritage of slavery. Mr. Cameron says, I know not when I have been more humiliated as a North Carolina farmer than when a few weeks ago at a railroad depot at the very doors of our state capitol I saw wagons drawn by Kentucky mules loading with northern hay for the supply not only of the town but to be taken to the country. Such a sight at the capital of a state whose population is almost exclusively devoted to agriculture is a most humiliating exhibition. Let us cease to use everything so far as it is practicable, that it is not the product of our own soil and workshops, not an axe or a broom or a bucket from Connecticut, but by every consideration of self-preservation, we are called to make better efforts to expel the northern grocer from the state with his butter and the Ohio and Kentucky horse, mule, and hog driver from our county at least. It is a reproach on us as farmers and no little deduction from our wealth that we suffer the populations of our towns and villages to supply themselves with butter from another Orange County in New York. We have promised to prove that the hay crop of the free states is worth considerably more than all of the cotton, tobacco, rice, hay, and hemp produced in the 15 slave states. The compilers of the last census, as we learned from Professor DeBow, the able and courteous superintendent in making up the hay tables, allowed 2,240 pounds to the ton. The price per ton at which we should estimate its value has puzzled us to some extent. Dealers in the article in Baltimore think it will average $25 in their market. 4 or 5 months ago, they sold it at $30 per ton. At the very time we write, though there is less activity in the article than usual, we learned from an examination of sundry price currents and commercial journals that hay is selling in Savannah at $33 per ton, in Mobile and New Orleans at $26, in Charleston at $25, in Louisville at $24, and in Cincinnati at $23. The average of these prices is $26.16 2/3, and we suppose it would be fair to employ the figures which would indicate this amount, the net value of a single ton, in calculating the total market of the entire crop. Were we to do this, and with foregoing facts in view, we submit to the intelligent men whether we would not be justifiable in doing it, the hay crop of the free states, 12,690,982 tons in 1850, would amount in valuation to the enormous sum of $331,081,695, more than 4 times the value of all the cotton produced in the United States during the same period. But we shall not make the calculation at what we have found to be the average value per ton of the country. What rate then shall be agreed upon as a basis of comparison between the value of the hay crop of the North and that of the South, and as a means of testing the truth of our declaration that the former exceeds the aggregate value of the cotton, tobacco, rice, hay, and hemp produced in the 15 slave states? Suppose we take 13,081 just half the average value, as the multiplier in this arithmetical exercise. This we can well afford to do. Indeed, we might reduce the amount per ton to much less than half the average value and still have a large margin left for triumphant demonstration. It is not our purpose, however, to make an overwhelming display of the incomparable greatness of the free states. In estimating the value of the various agricultural products of the 2 great sections of the country, we have been guided by prices emanating from the Bureau of Agriculture in Washington, and in a catalog of those prices now before us, we perceive that the average value of hay throughout the nation is supposed to be not more than half a cent per pound, $11.20 per ton, which, as we have seen above, is considerably less than half the present market value, and this, too, in the face of the fact that prices generally rule higher than they do just now. It will be admitted on all sides, however, that the prices fixed upon by the Bureau of Agriculture, taken as a whole, are as fair in one section of the country as in another, and that we cannot blamelessly deviate from them in one particular without deviating from them in another. $11.20 per ton shall therefore be the price, and notwithstanding these greatly reduced figures, we now renew with an addendum our declaration and promise that we can prove, and we shall now proceed to prove, that the annual hay crop of the free states is worth considerably more in dollars and cents than all the cotton, tobacco, rice, hay, hemp, and cane sugar annually produced in the 15 slave states. Hay crop of the Free States, 1850, 12,690,982 tons at 1120, and he comes to the calculation of $142,138,998. Now, he says that the entire agricultural production of the entire South added up to $138,605,723. So Helper comes to the conclusion that the value of the hay crop is more than the value of the entire agricultural production of the South. Now, he said hay crop of the Free States is 142,138,998. Sundry products of the slave states, 138,605,723. And he comes up with a balance in the favor of the Free States at $3,533,275. There is the account. Look at it and let it stand in attestation of the exalted virtues and surpassing powers of freedom. Scan it well, Messians, lords of the lash, and learn from it new lessons of utter inefficiency and despicable imbecility of slavery. Examine it minutely, liberty-loving patriots of the North, and behold it in additional evidences of the beauty, grandeur, and super-excellences of free institutions. Treasure it up in your minds, outraged friends and non-slaveholders of the South, and let the recollection of it arouse you to an inflexible determination to extirpate the monstrous enemy that stalks abroad in your land, and to recover the inalienable rights and liberties which have been filched from you by an unprincipled oligarchy. In deference to truth, decency, and good sense, it is to be hoped that Negro-driving politicians will never more have the effrontery to open their mouths in extolling the agricultural achievements of slave labor. Especially it is desirable that as a simple act of justice to a basely deceived populace that they may cease their stale and senseless harangues on the importance of cotton. The value of cotton to the South, to the North, to the nation, and to the world has been so grossly exaggerated, and so extensive have been the evils which have resulted in the consequence of the extraordinary misrepresentations concerning it, that we should feel constrained to reproach ourselves for remissness of duty if we failed to make an attempt to explode the popular error. The figures above show what it is and what it is not. Recur to them and learn the facts. So hyperbolically has the importance of cotton been magnified by certain pro-slavery politicians of the South, that the persons who would give credence to all their fustian and bombast would be under the necessity of believing that the very existence of almost everything in the heavens above and the earth beneath and in the water under the earth depended on it. The truth is, however, that the cotton crop is but little value to the South. New England and Old England, by their superior enterprise and sagacity, turn it chiefly to their own advantage. It is carried in their ships, spun in their factories, woven on their looms, insured in their offices, returned again in their own vessels, and with double freight and cost of manufacturing added, purchased by the South at a high premium. Of all the parties engaged or interested in the transportation and manufacture, the South is the only one that does not make a profit. Nor does she, as a general thing, make a profit by producing it. We are credibly informed that many of the farmers in the immediate vicinity of Baltimore, where we now write, have turned their attention exclusively to hay, and that from 1 acre they frequently gather 2 tons, for which they receive $50. Let us now inquire how many dollars may be expected from an acre planted in cotton. Mr. Cameron, from whose able address before the Agricultural Society of Orange County, North Carolina, we've already gleaned some interesting particulars, informs us that the cotton planters in his part of the country have contented themselves with a crop yielding only $10 or $12 per acre, and that the summing up of a large surface gives but a living result. An intelligent resident of the Palmetto State, writing in DeBow's Review not long since, advances the opinion that the cotton planters of South Carolina are not realizing more than 1% on the amount of capital they have invested, while in Virginia, very recently, an elderly slaveholder whose religious walk and conversation had recommended and promoted him to an eldership in the Presbyterian Church, and who supports himself and his family by raising niggers and tobacco, told us that for the last 8 or 10 years, aside from the increase of his human chattels, he felt quite confident that he had not cleared as much, even as 1% per annum, on the amount of his investment. The real and personal property of this aged Christian consists chiefly in a large tract of land and about 30 Negroes, most of whom, according to his own confession, are more expensive than profitable. The proceeds arising from the sale of tobacco they produce are all absorbed in the purchase of meat and bread for home consumption, and when the crop is stunted by drought, frost, or otherwise cut short, one of the Negroes must be sold to raise funds for the support of the others. Such are the agricultural achievements of slave labor, such are the results of the sum of all its villainies. The diabolical institution subsists on its own flesh. At one time, children are sold to procure food for the parents, at another, parents are sold to procure food for the children. Within its pestilential atmosphere, nothing succeeds. Progress and prosperity are unknown. Inanition and slothfulness ensue. Everything becomes dull, dismal, and unprofitable. Wretchedness and desolation run riot through the land. An aspect of most melancholy inactivity and dilapidation broods over every city and town. Ignorance and prejudice sit enthroned over the minds of people. Usurping despots wield the scepter of power everywhere, and in everything between the Delaware Bay and the Gulf of Mexico are the multitudinous evils of slavery apparent. The soil itself soon sickens and dies beneath the unnatural tread of the slaves. Hear what the Honorable C.C. Clay of Alabama has to say on the subject. His testimony is eminently suggestive, well-timed, and truthful, and we heartily commend it to the careful consideration of every spirited Southern who loves his country and desires to see it rescued from the fatal grasp of the mother of harlots. Says he, I can show you with sorrow in the olden portions of Alabama and in my native county of Madison the sad memorials of the artless and exhausting culture of cotton. Our small planters, after taking the cream off their lands, unable to restore them by rest, manure, or otherwise, are going further west and south in search of other virgin lands which they may and will despoil and impoverish in like manner. Our wealthier planters with greater means and no more skill are buying out their poorer neighbors, extending their plantations, and adding to their slave force. The wealthy few who are able to live on smaller profits and give their blasted fields some rest are thus pushing off the many who are merely independent. Of the $20 million annually realized from the sale of the cotton crop of Alabama, nearly all not expended in supporting the producers is reinvested in the land and Negroes. Thus the white population is decreased and the slave increased almost pari passu in several counties of our states. In 1825, Madison County cast about 3,000 votes. Now, she cannot cast exceeding 2,300. In traversing that county, one will discover numerous farmhouses, once abode of industrious and intelligent freemen, now occupied by slaves or tenantless, deserted and dilapidated. He will observe fields, once fertile, now unfenced, abandoned, and covered with those evil harbingers, foxtail and broomsedge. He will see the moss growing on the moldering walls of once thrifty villages, and will find one only master grasps the whole domain that once furnished happy homes for a dozen white families. Indeed, a country in its infancy where 50 years ago scarce a forest tree had been felled by the axe of the pioneer is already exhibiting the painful signs of senility and decay apparent in Virginia and the Carolinas. Someone has said that an honest confession is good for the soul, and if the adage be true, as we have no doubt it is, we think Mr. C.C. Clay is entitled to a quiet conscience, on one score at least. In the extract quoted above, he gives us a graphic description of the ruinous operations and influences of slavery in the Southwest, and we, as a native of Carolina and traveler through Virginia, are ready to bear testimony to the fitness of his remarks when he referred to those states as examples of senility and decay. With equal propriety, however, he might have stopped nearer home for a subject of comparison. Either the states bordering upon Alabama or indeed any other slave state would have answered his purpose quite as well as Virginia and the Carolinas. Wherever slavery exists, there he may find parallels to the destruction that is sweeping with such deadly influence over his unfortunate state. As for examples of vigorous, industrious, and thrifty communities, they can be found anywhere beyond the epicenter of slavery nowhere else. New York and Massachusetts, which by nature are confessedly far inferior to Virginia and the Carolinas, have, by the more liberal and equitable policy which they have pursued in sustaining liberty for slavery, attained a degree of eminence and prosperity altogether unknown in the slave states. And amidst all the hyperbole and cajolery of slave-driving politicians who, as we have already seen, are the books, the arts, the academies that show, contain, and govern all the South, we are rejoiced to see that Mr. Clay, Mr. Cameron, and a few others have had the boldness and honesty to step forward and proclaim the truth. All such frank admissions are to be hailed as good omens for the South. Nothing good can come from any attempt to conceal the unconcealable evidence of poverty and desolation everywhere trailing in the wake of slavery. Let the truth be told on all occasions of the North as well as the South, and the people will soon begin to discover the egregiousness of their errors, to draw just comparisons, to inquire into the cause and effect, and to adopt the more utile manners, and customs of their wiser contemporaries. In willfully traducing and decrying everything north of Mason and Dixon's line and excessively magnifying the importance of everything south of it, the oligarchy have, in the eyes of all liberal and intelligent men, only made an exhibition of their uncommon folly and dishonesty. For a long time, it is true, they have succeeded in deceiving the people and keeping them humbled in the murky sloughs of poverty and ignorance, and in instilling into their untutored minds passions and prejudices expressly calculated to strengthen and protect their accursed institution of slavery. But thanks to heaven, their inglorious reign is fast drawing to a close. With irresistible brilliancy, and in spite of the inner edict of tyrants, light from the pure fountain of knowledge is now streaming over the dark places of our land, and ere long, mark our words, they will ascend from Delaware and from Texas and from all the intermediate states a huzzah for freedom and for equal rights that will utterly confound the friends of despotism, set at defiance the authority of usurpers, and carry consternation to the heart of every slavery propagandist. To undeceive the people of the South, to bring them to a knowledge of the inferior and disreputable position which they occupy as a component part of the Union, to give prominence and popularity to those plans which, if adopted, will elevate us to an equality socially, morally, intellectually, industrially, politically, and financially with the most flourishing and refined nation in the world, and if possible, to place us in the van of even that, is the object of this work. Slaveholders, either from ignorance or from a willful disposition to propagate error, contend that the South has nothing to be ashamed of, that slavery has proved a blessing to her, and that her superiority over the North is an agricultural point of view, makes amends for all her shortcomings in other respects. On the other hand, we contend that many years of continual blushing and severe penance would not suffice to cancel or annul the shame and disgrace that justly attaches to the South in consequence of slavery, the dirtiest evil that ever befall the land. That the South bears nothing like even a respectable approximation to the North in navigation, commerce, or manufactures, and that contrary to the opinion entertained by 99/100th of her people, she is far behind the free states in the only thing which she has ever dared to boast, agriculture. We submit the question to the arbitration of figures which, it is said, do not lie, with regards to the bushel measure product of the soil, of which we have already taken an inventory. We have seen that there is a balance against the South in favor of the North of 17,423,152 bushels, and a difference in the value of the same also in favor of the North at $44,782,636. It is certainly a most novel kind of agricultural superiority that the South claims on this score. Our attention shall now be directed to the 12 principal measure products of free and of slave states: hay, cotton, butter and cheese, tobacco, cane, sugar, wool, rice, hemp, maple sugar, beeswax and honey, flax and the hops. And in taking an account of them, we shall, in order to show the exact quantity produced in each state, and for the convenience of future reference, peruse the same plan as that adopted in the preceding tables. Whether slavery will appear to better advantage in the scales than it did, the half bushel remains to be seen. It is possible that the rickety monster may make a better show on a new track. If it makes a more ridiculous display, we shall not be surprised. A careful examination of its precedents has taught us the folly of expecting anything good to issue from it in any manner whatever. It has no disposition to emulate the magnanimity of its betters, and as for a laudable ambition to excel, that is a characteristic altogether foreign to its nature. Languor and inertia are the insalutary viands upon which it delights to satiate its morbid appetite, and from bad to worse is the ill-omened motto under which, in all its feeble efforts and achievements, it ekes out a most miserable and deleterious existence. Pages 62 to 65 are nothing but agricultural tables, and a little bit on page 66. And he balances them all out and totals up the production from the north and the south. And he says, both quantity and value again in favor of the north. Behold also the enormousness of the difference. In this comparison with the south, neither hundreds, thousands, nor millions, according to the regular method of computation, are sufficient to exhibit the excess of the pound measure of the north. Recourse must be had at an almost inconceivable number. Billions must be called into play, and there are the figures telling us with unmistakable emphasis and distinctness that in this department of agriculture, as in every other, the North is vastly the superior of the South. The figures showing a total balance in favor of the former of 24,539,694,241 pounds, valued at $59,199,108. And yet the North is a poor, God-forsaken country, bleak, inhospitable, and unproductive. What's next? Is it necessary to adduce other facts in order to prove that the rural wealth of the free states is far greater than that of the slave states? Shall we make a further demonstration of the fertility of northern soil, or bring forward new evidences of the inefficient and desolating system of terra culture in the South? Will nothing less than confirmations strong as proofs of Holy Writ suffice to convince the South that she is standing in her own light and ruining both body and soul by the retention of slavery? Whatever duty and expedience require to be done, we are willing to do. Additional proofs are at hand. Slaveholders and slave breeders shall be convinced, confused, convicted, and converted. They shall in their hearts and consciences, if not with their tongues and pens, bear testimony to the triumphant achievement of free labor. In the two tables which immediately follow these remarks, they shall see how much more vigorous and fruitful the soil is when under the prudent management of free white husbandmen than it is when under the rude and nature-murdering tillage of enslaved Negroes. And in two subsequent tables, they shall find that the livestock, slaughtered animals, farms, and farming implements and machinery in the free states are worth at least $100,000 million more than the market value of the same in the slave states. In the face, however, of all these most significant and incontrovertible facts, the oligarchy have the unparalleled audacity to tell us that the South is the greatest agricultural country in the world, and that the North is a dreary waste unfit for cultivation and quite dependent on us for the necessaries of life. How preposterously false all such babble is, the following tables will show. Now, all the tables in this book, if you look it up on archive, are numbered, and this is page 69 and page 70. And on both these pages is table number 16, the actual crops per acre of the average in the free states, 1850, and the actual crops per acre and the average in the slave states in 1850. And it's very interesting here comparing both. And it says, what an obvious contrast between the vigor of liberty and the impotence of slavery. What an unanswerable argument in the favor of free labor. Add up the two columns of figures, and what is the result? 213 bushels as the products of 5 acres in the north, and only 170 bushels in the products of 5 acres in the south. He said, look at each item separately, and you will find that the average crop per acre of every article enumerated is greater in the free states than it is in the slave states. Examine the table at large, and you will perceive that while Massachusetts produces 16 bushels of wheat to the acre, Virginia produces only 7. That Pennsylvania produces 15 and Georgia only 5, and that while Iowa produces 36 bushels of oats to the acre, Mississippi produces only 12. That Rhode Island produces 30 and North Carolina only 10. That while Ohio produces 25 bushels of rye to the acre, Kentucky produces only 11. That Vermont produces 20 and Tennessee only 7. And that while Connecticut produces 40 bushels of Indian corn to the acre, Texas produces only 20. That New Jersey produces 33 and South Carolina only 11, that while New Hampshire produces 220 bushels of Irish potatoes to the acre, Maryland produces only 75, and that Michigan produces 140 and Alabama only 60. Now for the other beauties of slavery in another table. And of course, we're going to go to page 71, and there's table number 1819. And then over in page 72, he starts going into all the value of everything with livestock and stuff. And he says, by adding to the last balance in favor of the free states, the differences in value which we found in their favor and in our account of bushel and pound measure products, we shall have a very correct idea to the extent of which the undivided agricultural interests of the free states preponderate over those of the slave. Let us add the differences together and see what will be the results. And he shows the balance all in favor of the northern states. And he says, no figures of rhetoric can add emphasis or significance to these figures of arithmetic. They demonstrate conclusively the great moral triumph of liberty over slavery. They show unequivocally, in spite of all the blarney and boasting of slave-driving politicians, that the entire value of all the agricultural interests of the free states is very nearly twice as great as the entire value of all the agricultural interests of the slave states. The value of those interests in the former being $2,500 million, that of those in the latter only $1,400 million, leaving a balance in the favor of the free states of $1,188,299,803. That is what we call a full, fair, and complete vindication of free labor. Would we not be correct in calling it a total eclipse of the black orb? Can it be possible that the slavocracy will ever have the hardihood to open their mouths again on the subject of terraculture in the South? Dare they ever think of the cotton again? Ought they not, as a benefiting confession of their crimes and misdemeanors, and as a reasonable expiation for the countless evils which they have inflicted on society, to clothe themselves in sackcloth, and after a suitable season of contrition and severe penance follow the example of one Judas Iscariot and go and hang themselves? It will be observed that we have omitted the territories and the District of Columbia in all the preceding tables. We did this purposely. Our subject was to draw an equitable comparison between the value of free and slave labor in 31 sovereign states, where the two systems, comparatively unaffected by the wrangling of politicians and, as a matter of course, free from the interference of the general government, have had the fullest opportunities to exert their influence, to exhibit their virtues, and command themselves to the sober judgments of enlightened and discriminating minds. Had we counted the territories on the side of the North and the District of Columbia on the side of the South, the result would have been still greater in behalf of free labor, though the sum of all villainies has but a mere nominal existence in Delaware and Maryland, and we have invariably counted those states on the side of the South, and the consequence is that in many particulars the hopeless fortunes of slavery have been propped up and sustained by an imposing array of figures, which of right ought to be regarded as the property of freedom. But we like to be generous in an unfortunate foe, and would utterly disdain the use of any unfair means of attack or defense. We shall take no undue advantage of slavery. It shall already have a fair trial, and be judged according to its deserts. Already has it been weighed in the balance and found wanting. It has been measured in the half bushel and found wanting. It has been apprised in the field and found wanting. Whatever redeeming traits or qualities it may possess, if any, shall be brought to light by subjecting it to other tests. It was our desire and intention to furnish a correct table of gallon measure products of the several states of the Union, but we have not been successful in our attempt to procure the necessary statistics. Enough is known, however, to satisfy us that the value of the milk, wine, ardent spirits, malt liquors, fluids, oils, and molasses annually produced and sold in the free states is at least $50 millions greater than the value of the same articles annually produced and sold in the slave states. Of sweet milk alone, it is estimated that the monthly sales in 3 northern cities, New York, Philadelphia, and